Hi, it's Dennis Daly, and it's time to take another trip back to the Midwest, to my hometown, and mostly by Amtrak. We'll be going from Palm Springs all the way back to Washington, Indiana. Now, the first leg is to L.A. We'll overnight there and then take the coastal train up to the Bay Area. From there, we'll go to Glenwood Springs, Colorado, Galesburg, Illinois, rent a car there, drive home, return the car after my visit to St. Louis, then take another Amtrak routing to Glorieta, New Mexico, Santa Fe, and then back to Palm Springs. So here we go. It's my latest trip, and it's mostly on Amtrak, but it begins on a bus. You see, you can't get out of Palm Springs on Amtrak train except at about 1 o'clock in the morning, but there are 3 bus connections every day, and the view's wonderful. It's nice to go through this part of the world. By the way, it does make one stop at Cabazon. That's where the outlet mall is and a large casino. And then we head out, and you'll notice that I-10 parallels the railroad. I've said this a lot, but in most cases, the railroads were there first, and the highways followed later. So we head off toward Los Angeles, and you can tell we're getting closer because of the traffic. We exit and get to Fullerton, California. At Fullerton, we get off the bus and wait, and not very long, for a full-size Amtrak train. Fullerton has a lovely little train station and, of course, a great place to eat. And it pays tribute to why this is all here, the Santa Fe. Here comes the Amtrak California. This train will take us into Los Angeles. Well, there I am. I love trains. They're so easy to sleep on. The architecture in L.A. is very interesting, except, of course, you end up in kind of the worst part of town. All the train stations and bus stations are there. We took the Red Line subway. It connects directly to Union Station now, and took it to the north side of Los Angeles, actually to North Hollywood, to visit a friend. I waited for him just outside the North Hollywood station. After spending the day on the north side of Los Angeles, it was back down to the south side to my hotel, and the hotel is only a block and a half from Union Station. There you can see the tower. A good night's sleep, and then tomorrow a very short walk to get back on the train to head north to the San Francisco Bay Area. I made it the next morning, bum, knee, and all, to that venerable train station that's been there since the 1930s. Part of it's not used anymore, but a lot of train stations across the country have empty space. And in the middle of Union Station, this beautiful courtyard, a great place to think and rest. And I found out there was a lounge I could go to because I was traveling business class. It was nice. Free food and free drinks there, and shuttle service to get to the train. I was worried with my knee how I would get there, but Amtrak made it very easy to get from the lounge to the coastal Starlight, headed up the coast to the San Francisco Bay Area. A reminder of just how, well, the infrastructure of trains needs a little help. So I boarded the business class train, and because I was hobbling, they decided to put me in a handicapped area. For the entire train trip, I would be the only person in this little room on my own little train car. I felt like Elvis. Finally, at about 10 in the morning, we headed out of Los Angeles and then through the backside of the L.A. area to get on the northbound tracks. And because this train eventually will go all the way to Seattle. It made a lot of stops on the way. Here we are in Oxnard. That means we've gotten over to the coast. I went and got some soda pop and came back, and, well, I still had the car all to myself. The train then began heading north, along the coast. Some great views here. I thought it was going to rain for a while. But not all of the coast Starlight goes along the coast, but this is one area where the train goes along at a fairly good clip. I checked the GPS and found out we were going 77 miles an hour. Finally, we got to one of my favorite cities, San Luis Obispo. We met a southbound train that had begun its trip way up in the Seattle area. This part of California has very different scenery, and you start making some figure S loops. The reason is the train has to gain a lot of altitude in the next 100 miles to get up the coast. The GPS confirmed that we were going in a lot of corkscrews. It must have been fun for them to dig this part of the train up against the hillside. Well, it was time for a little dessert, so I had some no-sugar-added vanilla pudding. And then we went through some gorgeous agricultural areas. They're growing grapes there. And finally we got to an area I couldn't tell what was being grown. I think it should be a federal law that they have to put up signs to tell people what the crop is. I know what they're growing here. Then it was on again up the coast, looking over to Interstate 5 and all those poor souls driving along as we continued. You see that there? That's an abandoned tunnel. The train track route was changed a wee bit. Amtrak even brought me some ice, and I fell asleep. And then when I woke up, things had really changed. It had gotten dark, and we were pulling into a big train station in San Jose, at the far southern part of the Bay Area. So I knew I didn't have that much time to get ready for Emeryville, the end of the line today and the start of the trip tomorrow, and my hotel was right across the parking lot. Planned that pretty well. Great view from the window of San Francisco Bay and the new Bay Bridge. But I had my sights on something else. Tomorrow, we head east. See you then. Remember when we arrived in Emeryville last night, and when we checked into the hotel we could see the Bay Bridge? Well, it's morning now and the Bay Bridge is still there, but we have to say goodbye to the Bay Area and get on the big Amtrak superliner heading east across Donner Pass. This time I have a little room, not like the area on yesterday's train. It's called a roomette, just enough for two people to face each other, and the chairs become beds and a bunk at night. Emeryville's quite a place. Major trains stop there, and that's where the train starts, headed to the east. I was reminded immediately just how much water there is in this part of California, for this is what is called the California Delta area, supplying water for much of the state. It's kind of damp up here, but it doesn't stay this way for long. Here's the city of Davis. There's a college there. You can tell by all the bicycles. After you leave Davis, the train starts gaining altitude, and things start looking a little different. It's beautiful country up here, and it's really a reminder of just why it's better to take the train than to drive Interstate 80. We're headed toward Colfax now, which was, when the original railroad was built, an important accomplishment. Colfax is a great little town, and it displays its heritage to the coming of the railroad. There's a little park here with an old-fashioned freight train in it. As you leave Colfax, you'll notice the train goes along an area that was literally dug out of the side of the hill by Chinese workers, and there's one of the original tunnels. And in just a moment, you cross over the top of Interstate 80. These two roads cross each other a lot. And then as you head higher, the terrain changes again. And finally, in the blink of an eye, well, look, you're in Truckee, California, one of my favorite places. It's a genuine tourist trap, and it's a staging point for a lot of mountain climbing and skiing. And wouldn't you know, just as you leave Truckee, you start to see snow. For we're really gaining in altitude, and we're headed up toward Donner Pass, and this should be fun. I was unaware that there would be this much snow this late in the season up here in the higher elevations of California, and suddenly a wall of it. This is good sleeping territory. For the Amtrak train slithers through the area up here, and all through the season they have to run the snow clearing equipment for the Amtrak and the freight. Boy, this is really conducive to sleep. You wonder just how tall these walls of snow are. After you crest the top of Donner Pass, things look a little bit more forested. And as you head out from the Donner Pass area into Nevada, you parallel I-80 through Winnemucca and Elko, and then the old railroad went north to Promontory Summit. So the right-of-way we'll be taking to Salt Lake City is not the original. But I'll tell you, just like US 50 and 80 in Nevada, this is one of the loneliest parts of the world. Finally, on the trip east, nighttime catches up with you, and you look out your bedroom window to see a series of lights going past before you go to sleep. It was a great night to sleep on overnight. I always sleep well on trains, and when morning came, we had stopped in Green River, Utah. The scenery was slowly changing, and I knew this was going to be a great day, for we'd end up spending the night not on the train, but in the city of Glenwood Springs, Colorado, where I had been a couple of years ago and wanted to go back. You begin to parallel the Colorado River as you head into Glenwood Springs, and here you are at the classic old train station. I rented a car, went past the front of the train station and took some photos and headed out of town about 30 miles, because this is a very famous stretch of interstate, one of the last to be built. Glenwood Springs is a great city, and as I say, I wanted to come back to see it again. The next morning, the train left, headed out toward Denver. Not a very long, but a beautiful trip. And from the train, when you leave Glenwood Springs, you understand how important that part of the interstate we visited last night in the car was. For in order to slither 4 lanes through this narrow valley, with the railroad track and the river, part of the road had to be elevated. And in sections, as you'll see, it kind of looks like a layer cake. In order to get through part of the area, the upper elevation had to be brought through a series of tunnels. It was a genuine engineering triumph. Let's look at where we are. After leaving Glenwood Springs, the train followed the route of the Colorado River until just about here. The green line is a bus route, US 80, but we went north, following the Colorado River through Granby and finally where that star is through the, well, we'll tell you about that in a little bit. This is a gorgeous part of Colorado, and luckily you go through here during the daytime. There are several canyons. I checked the GPS. That's Old Highway 40 up there on the right. But you have to stop now and then because Amtrak waits for the freight trains. See how they carved 40 out of the edge of the cliff on the right and the railroad on the left. It's Wither Park, or is it Fraser? Anyway, it's just past Granby on the railroad. It's kind of funny to have memories of having been here by car.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are getting ready to go through the world-famous Moffett Tunnel. So we do ask at this time that you please remain in the car that you are in or in your sleeping compartment. We need those indoors on the upper level of the train to remain closed.
And here we are going into the Moffett Tunnel, and it'll be dark for about 8 minutes. The Moffett Tunnel saved over 170 miles on the old route. We went in here. There's the Moffett Tunnel. And look at this. Let's draw a loop around where the old winding railroad grade used to go. Imagine all those turns and switchbacks. You can still drive it, though, in a 4-wheel drive vehicle. Must be lovely.
In just a little less than 2 hours is going to be Denver Union Station.
And on the Denver side of the Moffett Tunnel, the geography's quite different. Finally, in a couple of hours, you start going through urban sprawl and end up in downtown Denver at the somewhat new Denver Amtrak station. There are 2 trains a day for Amtrak, but I was amazed at the amount of other rail traffic through here. This station has become a big hub for light rail in Denver, an expanding system that will take you far out into the suburbs. Finally, after a half-hour wait, the Amtrak heads out through the backside of Denver into the rest of Colorado, and then it gets dark and you sleep through Nebraska. See you tomorrow morning in Galesburg, Illinois. After another great night's sleep on Amtrak, mostly through Nebraska, I woke up in Iowa. The day before, I had looked at the map and decided to change my routing. You see, Amtrak comes in from Iowa, and at a city called Galesburg, Illinois, it turns northeast and goes to Chicago. The original plan was at Chicago to rent a car and drive to my hometown in southern Indiana. But noticing on the map that Galesburg is just about the same distance from my hometown as is Chicago, I thought, why go downtown Chicago, incur all the rush hour? Why not just rent a car in Galesburg and drive home? And that's exactly what I did. Later, I would take the car back to St. Louis. I found Galesburg to really be a great little train station, and if you look hard enough through the buildings, you'll see that Enterprise Car Rental is just across the parking lot. So I picked up my little car and headed out through Illinois, heading south. I'll cross the Wabash, and it wasn't too long before I ended up with this scene. The state of Illinois is doing a lot to rehabilitate its old roads, and look on the right, there's the older alignment with that great bridge. I even stopped near Champaign and did a video piece on a very dangerous curve. That's Old 66 there, and this was part of Old 66. If you look hard enough, you can still find remnants. So back onto the 4-lane, heading south through Peoria, through cities I'd never been through before, to smaller roads and farm equipment, and in my hometown, meeting with 2 of my college friends at the local Greasy Spoon. And this is one reason you really want to go back home. And then this, a bittersweet few moments at my mom and dad's graves, sprucing it up. Then back onto the 2-lane for another assignment, to see a museum dedicated to Red Skelton. It's a fantastic place with an incredibly wonderful theater. And then about, an hour the other way, down a country road to a little city called French Lick, which at one time had the largest indoor room in the world, and that hotel is being restored. 4 days back home, and then back to Amtrak. It was tough to leave Washington, Indiana, but even tougher to leave friends, and still worse, I had to leave the White Steamer, my favorite restaurant there. Off onto US 50, and I noticed how nice the line on the right side of the road looked. Yep, got behind more construction. Past the old cathedral in Vincennes and then headed toward the Abraham Lincoln Bridge. Turned to the left and checked out the George Rogers Clark Memorial, biggest memorial to a single person anywhere in the U.S. outside of Washington. Crossing the Abraham Lincoln Bridge into the flatness of southern Illinois. And it's not quite boring, but it's much like this all the way to St. Louis. As you get closer, you begin to see the Gateway Arch. It's really the marker that gets you into downtown. And there is the mighty Mississippi. I chose one of the older bridges to get into downtown because Enterprise Rent-A-Car is smack dab at the base of the Gateway Arch. You know, it'd be great to work there because you could easily explain how to get to the office. It's right there. Possibly one of the best locations in St. Louis. Enterprise drove me over to the Amtrak station. I was early, so naturally I stopped to get some soda pop and also to work as many crossword puzzles as I could until they sounded the all aboard. The nice lady ushered us onto the train and we were off. You know, in all big cities, you have to go through the warehouse district to get out of town. But when you do, the view is just great. You begin to parallel the Missouri River, for this is the Missouri River Runner train. And it goes past some great small towns on its way from St. Louis all the way across Missouri to Kansas City. The train just follows a mostly westward path, mostly beside the Missouri River. We'll change trains there and overnight all the way to Santa Fe, New Mexico. The Amtrak train that takes that routing started out in Chicago, and since it will be dark when we get to Kansas City, we won't see morning again until we're into Colorado. So the Missouri River Runner took us through some great territory. The weather wasn't all that good, but every time we stopped, it gave me a chance to look at, well, abandoned train stations and small towns along the way. Finally, as happens every day, it started getting dark and we were in Independence, the last stop on the Truman funeral train. And that means the next stop, yep, Kansas City. When you get off there, and I had a bad knee at the time, you have a long walk to get into the station. But finally, I was in the train, navigating that wonderful narrow stairwell, going to my roomette. It's been a long day, and it'll be another overnight on Amtrak. It is morning of the last leg on our Amtrak trip back to the Midwest. And as I got my act together and prepared for breakfast, the train was pulling into a busy city called Trinidad, Colorado. A small town, but it has an overhead highway, and this is a genuine trading center, a center of activity for this part of far southeastern Colorado. After you leave Trinidad, you head out through some more great scenery. And if I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. It is the scenery you see on the train that you miss on the highway, like this, the sign for the Raton Tunnel between Colorado and New Mexico. You see, there is a ridge that runs through this part of the world. There it is. And on the north side, Colorado, and to the south, New Mexico. The Amtrak train comes in from the north and heads into the Raton Tunnel. On the south side, it exits and heads for the train station. On the right, the interstate was simply cut through the ridge, so there is no tunnel for the interstate highway running down this same path. But once you pass that sign, there's a marker. You have to look quickly, the dividing line between Colorado and New Mexico, and if you get a good look at it, the next thing, you can't see anything because you're in the Raton Tunnel. You can see a little bit, your eyes adjust a couple of minutes later, and you're on the New Mexico side, and you're in the city of Raton. This is a beautifully restored train station here. There are a lot of buses that leave Raton and go to other parts of the Southwest. It is a great connecting point for Amtrak. Now you're in Las Vegas, but don't get out your quarters. This is Las Vegas, New Mexico, not Las Vegas, Nevada. Back on the road again, past a little siding marker, and you know there are a lot of cities in the Southwest named just for the railroad markers. Finally, we're in Lamy, New Mexico, a train station that looks as if you've stepped back into the 1930s. Everything's so well preserved. Then a side trip to Santa Fe, one of America's great cities. So old that while they had all kinds of good stuff here, we were still working on the Declaration of Independence on the East Coast. A rental car and back out on the highway to another place lost in time. Down a bumpy road to a little city called Glorieta, New Mexico. You see, one of the ladies I do breakfast with every morning grew up here 90 years ago. And when she heard I was coming to that area, she wanted me to stop by. It's a city with not much left. The railroad goes through here, and by golly, there's a post office. It's even open on Saturday. Then finally back to Lamy for more of the trip west to wrap up our trip to Indiana and other points east. The scenery changes slowly as you go through this part of the world, and this is again an area that you don't see very much if you drive, for you go through nowhere and the backside of cities where America lives. It gives you time to think. In Albuquerque, there's a long stopover, and you can get out and buy all kinds of trinkets, but I wasn't interested in trinkets. I wanted supper in the dining car. And as I began to eat, as we headed west, it got darker and darker, the sun hitting the red hills in the distance, and as I was finishing my dessert, nighttime began to fall in the western U.S. And so I snuggled down for another sleep aboard Amtrak, knowing that tomorrow I'd be home. It was another great trip, a few flaws, but you expect that on every vacation. So see you next time as we go somewhere else. I'm Dennis Daly.